You going to want these, or you're going to have a different, like I'll do that side? What do you want to do?
Mark's going to talk first and then introduce Elena, so she might use those slides.
Okay. So Elena, just tell me when to click, and we're, next slide, and I'll change the slides.
Okay.
Well, if we're ready to start, I'll welcome NGV members, NGVA members and participants to our webinar. We're fortunate to have our good friend, Dr. Jeffrey Seisler, himself, a former executive director, president of NGVAmerica. Thanks, Jeff, for being with us. And he's got some interesting information to share with us. And before he does that, let me turn it over to Mark Smith. Mark, another good friend of our organization and the industry. Most folks know Mark. He's a program manager for technology integration with the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office. So with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our speakers. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending where you're at. Thanks for joining. Very excited about this presentation and to hear from Jeff about the work he did supporting DOE's effort with a U.S. government bilateral agreement on energy with Brazil and their desire to look at how they commercialize natural gas for medium and heavy duty vehicles. When Elena Berger from our International Affairs Department approached me about this, I guess back in 2019, so almost 3 years ago, seems hard to believe. It was a very easy name to come up with of Jeff Seisler, because anybody who knows Jeff, probably on any continent, if you ask them, who do we talk to about a project in some country, wherever it may be, Jeff Seisler is going to be the name you hear. And a lot of reasons for that. As Dan mentioned, Jeff was the founding executive director for what today is NGVAmerica, but was first the Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition back in 1998. From there, he went on to be the founding executive director for the European Natural Gas Vehicle Association, which is today known as NGVA Europe. And then he went on to be one of the founders of the International Association for Natural Gas Vehicles, which is now known as NGV Global, excuse me. And since then, he's been the president and CEO for Clean Fuels Consulting. So again, Jeff is a friend of an industry, and he's supported us at DOE with other projects and natural gas projects in Israel and Kazakhstan. So again, a very easy decision to get Jeff involved with this, given all of his expertise. Or as one of our other icons of the natural gas vehicle industry, Boone Pickens, used to say, hey, I want to deal with somebody who's been battle tested. And Jeff's been battle tested. Hopefully not too many bumps and bruises to show for it.
Lots of gray hair.
Lots of gray hair. Well, you've earned every one, Jeff, as we all have, I think. But we're happy to have Jeff with this. But before I turn it over to Jeff, I first want to go to Elena Berger from our International Affairs Office, who has been very supportive of this process. She has to do a lot of herding of the cats, if you will, trying to coordinate and facilitate and translate for many different virtual meetings. And so with that, Jeff, thank you in advance. Well, thank you, first of all, for all the work you've done on this. Thank you in advance for the presentation. We're all looking forward to it. And Elena, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you again for the great support your office has provided throughout this project, and it's been a wonderful experience. And in fact, as we conclude the roadmap, our colleagues from Brazil are excited with all the recommendations, and the process was very, as Jeff will say, was very interactive. And this project takes place under the West Brazil Energy Forum, which is the bilateral framework that coordinates our bilateral energy cooperation with Brazil. The U.S. Brazil Energy Forum, or USBEF as is known, is co-chaired by the Department of the Secretary of Energy and Brazil's Ministry of Mines and Energy, although this project involves many other agencies. And thank you again, Mark, for the great support that EERE provided, and especially your office, the VTO office. And Jeff, if you want to pass the slide. Yeah, so this project was directed and coordinated, as I mentioned, by the U.S. government and the government of Brazil, and we had a very inclusive process as well. So if you have any questions about the bilateral cooperation with Brazil and how this project inserts itself within the framework of the bilateral cooperation, I will be happy to answer questions. But Jeff, now I turn it, or Mark, I turn it back to you so we can get started. And Jeff, you deserve to have all the time to present the roadmap.
Okay. Well, thank you both. It's a great introduction, and I'm really pleased to be involved with this project and have all the great support from DOE and the Brazilian colleagues. We're going to present the overview of the roadmap, the process, and the content. I'm going to give you a very brief view of the Brazilian energy profile, so to put it into context of what this means for the development of the commercial market for heavy-duty vehicles. We're going to look at the strengths and opportunities for the heavy-duty market in Brazil, the challenges to commercialization, and the next steps, some of the key recommendations that we made in the roadmap. The process started in November 2020. And we spent about 3 months doing background research and discussions to draft a set of goals, as well as strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges. We met in February in a series of stakeholder teleconferences. There were 2 hours each for 6 different stakeholder groups. Following that, we had additional informational meetings with Inmetro, which is the standards organization in Brazil, the Brazilian Development Bank, and the Energy Research Group. We've had over 100 stakeholders involved in this process. So we presented the SWOCs, got feedback from the various stakeholders, and in mid-March, we requested all this feedback from each of them on the goals, the SWOCs, and the draft roadmap that we presented. So there was a lot of give and take back and forth. On the 27th of May, there was a virtual workshop for 3 hours. We presented the results of the draft to all of the stakeholder groups. So it was the first opportunity that everybody had to get together to get their reactions, their input, their guidance, their questions for the development of the final roadmap, which was presented to everybody on the 19th of July. And in that period of time, there was a lot of give and take between individuals, between some of the organizations, just so we could really refine what we had provided, what we learned, and that what we were giving back was something that was an accurate reflection of the entire situation. So the groups that we talked to were the government, the downstream natural gas industry, vehicle manufacturers, as well as NGV systems and component suppliers, numbers of fleet operators, the fuel station and infrastructure suppliers, and civil society. And that's a wide-ranging group of non-governmental organizations, environmental and health advocates, universities, financial institutions. So it's a really interesting group. A lot of them are supporting the government work as consultants or advocates. Now, what this roadmap looks like, there's 2 parts to it, and it's in PowerPoint presentation structure. The first part goes through all of the goals of the 6 stakeholder views. We present a Brazilian overview of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges, kind of the highlights, and then the most critical challenges. The annex of that first part includes all of the stakeholder SWOCs. Each one has their own set of SWOCs. The part 2 becomes a real critical part where it presents the action items, everything that people are supposed to do, the priorities over a timeline, and specific milestones. There's an annex in the back of this, which includes all of the stakeholder action matrices, which I'm going to show you. And there again, that's supported by a master matrix, or a monster matrix, if you will, of all the stakeholder actions in one large format, so you can see sort of what goes on with the other stakeholders as a total picture. The second annex is a dissemination plan for the roadmap, and the third annex of this part 2 is a fairly extensive document resource library and table of contents, which is supported by a whole bunch of about documents and standards and regulations that we've included to support a lot of the work that's going to get done in the roadmap. Now, here's what the essence of the roadmap looks like per group, what stakeholders can do and when they should do it. There's one matrix set per stakeholder group. It's got a series of action items across the top, and then per time frame, it's a 5-year time frame of year 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 and 5. So the actions can be viewed horizontally, how they look within each time frame, and then there's a vertical integration over time, so you can see how these things will develop, how the action plan develops as we move through time. Now, the action items, each of the groups have 4 sets of action items over the 3 time frames. And there's a lot of similarity to these groups of activities. The public sector, this is supported by initially a lot of strategic implementation. And that's kind of the theme of this whole set by the group of stakeholders. All has to do with technology development, market strategy, and how the development and implementation is going to be over this period of time. Standards and regulations, which is going to speak a lot about in the presentation, is the common theme that runs through all of the stakeholders, as well as information analysis and communication. That's another common theme. For the government, developing the mandates, incentives, and policies that are going to support the commercial activities. Similarly, for the rest of the stakeholders, there's advocacy work, education work, work that is shared throughout all the stakeholders, so the government can completely understand what the concerns are of the various stakeholders. Now, the one group that's a little bit different are the fleet operators, because that's where the rubber meets the road. These are the folks, obviously, who are running the vehicles. So for them, they have to look at vehicle operations planning, facilities management, both fueling and their workshops to work on the vehicles, also information and communication, and then personnel management and training. So it falls a little bit outside of these common topic areas, but when you look at the entire roadmap, all of these pieces are, they do fit together. Now, to understand the background, a little bit of knowledge about what is going on with the Brazilian energy system. Typical of a lot of countries, they have a large share of petroleum and other liquids. A lot of that is LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. But they are in a very enviable position. They're third in the world for its renewable energy capacity and second in the world for renewable energy production. So they're very, very enviable situation. A lot of hydroelectric power and other renewables. They also have a vast natural gas resource that's going to be exploited through a new infrastructure development, which I'm going to talk about. When we look at just the renewable energy sector, bioenergy, ethanol remains dominant. And this is based on a lot of sugarcane production in quite a large region of Brazil. Now, there's going to be much more government and public sector emphasis being placed on biomethane as part of this renewable mix as more and more gas comes into the energy sector. And you can see a large sector also of hydropower. Now, hydropower dominates the electric production sector for Brazil, about 64%. But there was a period where there were periodic droughts between 2012 and 2016, and you can see the hydroelectricity production went down, and what did they have to supplant that with was natural gas. So there's also a message in here for policymakers in particular, that let's not get rid of all the natural gas resources, the pipelines. Apart from the fact that it's a global warming gas, there's going to be a large role for natural gas to play until the 2050s, 2060s, when a substantial amount of renewable resources are a sustainable reality in the energy sector in different countries. So this is just an indication of how the gas continues to play an important role. Now, the infrastructure network for imports, for exports, for internal distribution is going to expand considerably in Brazil. There are 422 municipalities that currently have gas service. You can see by some of the data here, a sizable transmission pipeline infrastructure, which is basically in the eastern section of the country, because a lot of the central part is, as you know, is jungle, and it's more difficult to penetrate that with gas products. But along with this new development of the gas industry, there's going to be opportunities for liquefied natural gas as well, which presents really great opportunities in the heavy-duty sector. So you're going to see a growth of that LNG. There are 4 receiving terminals, which will expand to 6 in the next couple of years. So a really good opportunity. And with those ports, along that comes a nexus for the trucks, the trains, and ships as well. Now, there are a lot of strengths and opportunities in the heavy-duty NGV market sector that could be attractive to investors and stakeholders. As I was saying, the future of the natural gas supply outlook is very optimistic. The country is embarking on a new plan supported by the government called the New Gas Law of 2021. Its aim is to diversify the gas supply, expand the gas distribution to areas where gas previously has not been available. A lot of this has to do with breaking the existing monopoly. Petrobras has been a very effective and very large supplier of gas. And now with the new gas plan, new gas law, a lot of other companies are going to have access, and Petrobras, that monopoly is going to be reduced. They're still going to have a very important role to play, but a lot of new supply in domestic gas is anticipated to increase by about 80% by 2030 and continue strong growth in 2040 and beyond. Biomethane is going to present a new renewable option. We all know about the well-to-wheel basis. You can reduce as much as 95% of the CO2 on a well-to-wheel production. And this is going to also help improve the trade balance for Brazil, reducing diesel imports, which represent about 20% of the diesel consumed in Brazil. Now, government policies and analyses supporting NGV development are moving forward at a fairly good pace. The environmental challenges have been well recognized in the government sector. They've done some very important studies looking at the impacts of particulates and NOx on various populations, particularly in Rio and in Sao Paulo. There are existing NGV policies, standards, and regulations that provide a foundation for the expansion to the heavy-duty sector, because there are about 2.5 million natural gas vehicles, light-duty vehicles, supported by about 1,632, I think is the exact number these days, fueling stations. So they're quite familiar with natural gas vehicles. There are some financing and incentives at the national, regional, and local levels for electric vehicles and as well as natural gas vehicles. And there's very strong support for the expansion of the industry, as we've said, with the new gas market program. There are some horizontal mechanisms in place, interagency coordination of energy and transport by the federal government. There's an energy policy committee, an interagency working group on natural gas. So the federal government has some very interesting mechanisms across their lines that are supporting natural gas. And they have a good, what they call the Renovo biopolicy. It's biomethane has been identified as a renewable resource. It's part of the energy mix, and carbon credits are also provided. So we're going to see an increase in biogas. Now, Brazil does have natural gas vehicle technologies to meet the needs of the bus and the heavy truck customers. We all know about the environmental advantages of natural gas vehicles, which has been very well documented. There's also an opportunity for the dual fuel option, diesel, natural gas in compression ignition engines for heavy duty vehicles. Those conversions can be done on older vehicles, and they can be removed if the trucks need to be resold. Government policymakers are supportive of all this, and the market is a very large and diverse market with lots of space for proactive policies. Now, as of May 2021, the only truck manufacturer producing natural gas vehicles in Brazil is Scania. They've got one truck and one bus model supported by a variety of engines. Most of the other truck operators, truck OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, have gas variants, but they're not yet offered in Brazil. So you can see in this diagram that there are a series of Brazilian truck manufacturers, Iveco, MAN and Mercedes, as well as the Swedish Scania and Volvo. So there's a strong truck market, nearly 2 million trucks, new trucks coming onto the market, almost 76,000 trucks as of in 2018, when the last time we can get those kinds of numbers on that. 335,000 metro buses, with a substantial number of buses coming in every year, and a good population of semi-heavy trucks and heavy-duty trucks. Also, Cummins provides their Euro 5 models of natural gas engines. So we see the potential for the OEMs to develop. Now, this heavy-duty market is a potential anchor for infrastructure development as the gas industry expands. There has been work done, which I'm going to show you momentarily, about blue corridors for CNG, LNG, and biomethane. Great opportunities for centralized or small-scale liquefaction, where you have the liquefaction LNG coming in at these various ports, but also the potential to develop it on site. There's a good potential for truck stop stations for CNG and LNG that can be installed along the existing routes where trucks are traveling. A potential for mobile fuel stations, portable LNG stations, and also co-locating gas markets stations as these gas markets begin to develop. And this will complement the vehicle development sector as well. Now, the BNDES, the Brazilian bank, has done some really excellent analytic work to prepare for the expansion of the NGV fuel station network. This was planned phase 1, and you can see how they've looked at here different routes. They've done a great analysis of where the trucks drive, looking at the economics of this as well as the environmental impact. So they've done a phase 1 and phase 2, and that is going to help a lot move these vehicles into the marketplace simultaneously by developing the fueling infrastructure. Now, having said that, there's always been a fair share of challenges for this particular market. The NGV technologies do face certain constraints with availability and costs. As I've mentioned, the local production capability for heavy-duty technologies right now is lacking. All of these companies have NGVs, but further development internally is going to be needed to bring these things, bring the trucks and the buses to the market, not just on the importation side, but hopefully to help develop the internal production capacity, which of course will have a positive impact on employment opportunities. Natural gas vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles in particular, are more expensive than the diesel variants. And right now, mostly because of cost, lightweight CNG cylinders, type 3 and 4, which are suitable and the best for heavy-duty trucks, are not available in Brazil. The homologation certification procedures of these tanks is expensive. So today, type 1 steel cylinders are the mainstream for NGVs, both light duty and heavy duty vehicles. In terms of the truck market, another issue is the age factor. You can see that between 11 and 12% of the truck market are between 0 or brand new trucks up to 3 years old. About 35% are between 4 and 10 years old. And then there's a large sector. We're talking here, over 50% of the trucks are, more than 11 years old, more than 20, and then that sector of, more than 20 years old. So it is a market which is supplanted with a constant flow of new vehicles, but this may be an opportunity to bring in dual fuel technologies. Another key weakness and challenge is the fluctuation in fuel price differential between natural gas and diesel. The fluctuations of both diesel and gas, as well as the real, their monetary, their value, their not their dollar, but their exchange, the real exchange rate affects generally favorable price differentials between the two competing fuels. Also, diesel pricing system in Brazil is subject to the pricing strategy of the major refiners and the oil importers. Now, that may have some changes as this new market, the new gas market, starts to take over. And the price of gas is adjusted every 3 months. It can lag up or down related to diesel. So it's a fairly complicated pricing system that occurs. And you can see here that the fluctuating price differential between gas and diesel, it will tend to lengthen the total cost of operation, making fleet decisions a little more challenging. We know that typically natural gas must be about 30 to 50% less than diesel to create a favorable TCO. And you can see the gas prices consistently are less than diesel and low sulfur diesel introduced in 2012-13, but it's about 25%. So it's just under that threshold that really is going to make natural gas vehicles more economically competitive for the fleet operators. The other issue is lacks of regulations and standards for heavy-duty vehicles. Lots of existing standards and regulations for the light duty, but because they've been prohibited up to now, there's an absence of regulations for LNG trucks, tanks, fuel connectors and receptacles, as well as fuel stations, including LCNG, liquid to CNG stations. And this is going to constrain, at this moment, the current use of LNG. Fuel connectors. They're still using the bayonet-style connector with the O-rings, and they're not using in the light-duty sector NGV1, and for some of the larger trucks, the larger medium-duty trucks, NGV2. Dual fuel, the diesel-gas opportunity, it's available, but there aren't any regulations, and regulations for dual fuel systems are fairly complicated. Gas composition is an issue, particularly right now. There's been some discussion with the government about ethane content, not the government, but the National Petroleum Agency. Right now, it's about 6%. Legal limit is 12%, but the ANP is talking about raising this to 18%, which is unacceptable to the truck and engine manufacturers. They're all looking for ethane content, below 11%, more like 6 and 4%. The gas industry is lobbying heavily to make sure that that is kept down. Fuel price labeling, the energy equivalency at the public fuel stations. It's very challenging. They don't have it for the light duty sector, although there have been some attempts to develop energy equivalency. But with the new market for trucks, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to display the energy equivalencies of natural gas, diesel, because now you're only talking about really two energy equivalencies, the diesel energy equivalency for natural gas, and that's a good opportunity. Standards, there are ISO standards that are used to some degree in Brazil. They're the principal foundation. And then there's Mercosur, which is the South American Standards Institute, essentially, which uses a lot of ISO standards. Also, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, which I've spent a lot of years working there, developing standards and regulations, those aren't recognized by the Brazilian government and the Brazilian Standards Institute. And they include LNG, dual fuel systems, fuel connectors, dangerous goods vehicles. So there's a full set of standards that are available, but not yet recognized. The other issue in Brazil are tariffs and taxes. Taxes, we know, can affect a lot of elements. They're significantly slow or disrupt the development of natural gas heavy-duty markets. Import tariffs really can impede environmentally friendly and beneficial technologies from coming into Brazil, such as natural gas vehicles, and those things associated with them, like lightweight CNG cylinders, types 3 and types 4. Natural gas vehicles are subject to import tariffs. Electric vehicles are not. So this can establish a potential competitive disadvantage. And the amount and level of various taxes on vehicles and their use can affect the TCO of heavy-duty vehicles. Now, the balance in the energy transport policies are going to be needed to help shape a favorable market for gas trucks and buses. Of course, we're going to need incentives and mandates. Those that exist for electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles will influence and potentially reshape customer decisions about their use of diesel and alternative fuels. Over time, of course, concerns about fossil methane as a greenhouse gas and its contribution to global warming is going to impact NGV markets. It has significantly already in Europe, and it is beginning to impact markets in the United States. And that's going to potentially, however, help motivate this shift toward biomethane. Federal government funding, incentive, fiscal mechanisms, all are going to be necessary to get this market moving. Now, what are the next steps that we've recommended to commercialize NGVs as part of the roadmap? In terms of process, and this is extremely important, the roadmap recommends horizontal integration of government policymaking with stakeholder input, as well as vertical integration of the stakeholders into the decision process. Now, what does that mean? As I've mentioned before, the government has already begun a process to develop and manage this interagency policymaking at the federal level. But a very strong recommendation that we've made is to include and create a high-level group of stakeholder representatives. This is something that goes on in the policymaking process in Europe, to a lesser degree in the United States, although there are mechanisms for public input. But bringing together some of the industry representatives, particularly the associations, the non-governmental organizations, to participate and provide information to the federal government. It's a process that I've been involved in Europe, and it's a tremendous process. It works very well, and it's really great for advocates of the car industry, the gas industry, the equipment suppliers, all to be part of this on a horizontally integrated system. So you're looking at the environment, the energy people, the transportation policymakers. Now, when it comes to moving toward the vertical integration at the state and local, that's where the public-private partnerships really is a tremendous opportunity. And we keep using and recommending the U.S. Clean Cities model, which I have said many times before, and many of you may have heard me say this. I think it's one of the best programs that the Department of Energy has sponsored over the years. So the vertical integration that we've recommended is based upon the clean cities. And of course, the agenda is very similar. Similar is the roadmap itself. Policy development, fuels and infrastructure, standards and regulations, strategies for marketing, education, training, and communications. All of these are part of the things that are needed to be done, both horizontally and vertically. Now, BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, as I said, has really done a tremendous job at early development of a lot of things that are recommended in the roadmap. They're talking about expanding the registration of new brands and models of CNG vehicles, financing the development of stations, financing the qualification of CNG stations specifically for the supply of heavy-duty vehicles, treatment of the dual fuel regulations, coordinating strategy for urban mobility, and structuring the blue corridors. Now, the public sector action plan in the first year and ongoing is looking at international models that exist already to help fill some of the gaps for the standards and regulatory development. And that's one really important element, is begin to develop standards and regulations for LNG trucks, fuel tanks, connectors. The models exist with ISO. They exist in the UN ECE Regulation 110, so they don't have to be redeveloped because it takes a huge amount of time, as we all know, to develop these. Dual fuel, to begin the development of those regulations. The model exists within UN ECE Regulation 49. It took us 6 years to develop these regulations, and it was a very complex process. There's no point in trying to recreate that wheel, but to rather bring those in and use those models. Now, in the absence of these types of standards and regulations, we've recommended in the roadmap temporary exemptions for heavy-duty LNG truck and fueling stations that should be considered while the Brazilians are creating these standards. But the caveat is the exemption should exist for those technologies that already are in compliance with the international standards and regulations, either ISO or the UN regulations. And this is important because we don't want new technologies coming in, and there are certain countries that have technologies that are not in compliance with these highest level of standards and regulations. And by that, I'm talking about ISO and the UN. I've mentioned the NGV2, the bayonet-style fuel connectors. A lot of you have seen those before years and years ago, and the O-rings scattered on the ground of the fueling stations. Well, for trucks, we're going to need high-speed fueling, and NGV2 is the only thing that is really going to supply that. So right now, we're talking about virgin territory in heavy-duty fueling stations. There's no reason why not to bring that right in, but they need to create the standard or the regulation that's going to allow for that. Other important elements, natural gas, LNG, biomass, fuel composition. key issues that we've all grappled with in other markets. The WABI index, methane number, which is the anti-NOx resistance, and ethane content, emissions certification test fuels. These are very important fuel components that have a large impact on the sustainability of the NGV sector. Small-scale liquefaction systems. You can't build these unless you've got standards and regulations. Also, ADR, the dangerous goods vehicles certified to run on CNG or LNG as the propulsion fuel. We've developed, it took about 3 or 4 years to develop those at the UN. They exist. They've been proven for safety. So those are available for Brazil. And also, as I said before, the diesel liter equivalent is a user-friendly opportunity to show the diesel fleet operators of the true differences between natural gas and diesel. It's challenging for the light-duty market. There's no reason why not to start that right now with the heavy-duty market. And last but not least, if not already in force, cylinder end-of-use handling procedures also is another element that is something that should be looked at. There are lots of opportunities to start to lower the costs and improve the economics of natural gas vehicles. Stabilization of the fuel prices. I'm going to address all of these issues in a couple of slides coming up. The stabilization, I've already said that it has some challenges because there are a lot of elements, including the real and the exchange rate. So developing an actual policy mechanism to stabilize this is very complicated in Brazil. So the conclusion that we've drawn is it's not going to be possible. There are other price reduction mechanisms that have to be developed to create this favorable TCO for fleet operators. Now, a lot of these are very well known in certain markets, particularly in the United States. Natural gas sellers can provide prices of gas that are linked to the price of diesel at a certain percentage below. It may be a specific number or a specific percentage. So if the price of diesel goes up and down, so too will the price fluctuate at a sustainable and stable level. So that can help the fleet operators develop a consistent TCO. Now, this can be based on long-term contract, 5 years, or take-or-pay provisions that are used by gas suppliers, multi-stakeholder financing partnerships focused on the customer. I've told them about the Zero Now model used by Clean Energy, and I think it's a great model that's also been used in some other areas where the price differential for the natural gas truck will be financed by the fuel supplier and or the bank, and the guaranteed price in the case of the Zero Now model is up to $1 less than the price of diesel. And this same kind of concept can be used in Brazil in the absence of having a price mechanism set by government or the industry. Of course, taxes, there's a whole wish list of tax reductions that the stakeholders have brought out to us. There is a very complicated tax structure because Brazil is a very large country and they have state taxes, local taxes. All of these have opportunities for reductions. Reduction of the tax on purchasing the vehicles themselves, exempting ownership taxes. There is mandatory insurance and also licensing taxes. These are all opportunities to be fiddled with and adjusted. A real key opportunity that's recommended in the roadmap is exemption of road tolls. The truckers have to deal with this all the time. We've seen this happen in Germany. It's been highly successful. The truck operators love it because it is a very large influence on their total cost of operation. So that is one opportunity because there are a lot of road tolls in Brazil. I've mentioned the tariffs already. They've got to create favorable tariff conditions to make imported NGV technology that's not available in Brazil more cost competitive. And we're labeling those as environmentally friendly technologies, EFTs. So if you have technologies coming in that don't exist in Brazil, why not let them in? Because it's going to help clean the environment. That's particularly important for lightweight CNG cylinders, which currently there's as much as a 35% import tax. The import tax can range between about 17 to 35%, depending upon a lot of variables. So for gas engines, for natural gas fueling systems, all this equipment can be given an exemption because it's going to help improve the environment. So the other thing is they have an ex-tariffario, which is granted to ISO certified cylinders and LNG dispensers. That can be cut. The revenue impact for government is important, but instead of at 35%, drop it to something like 3 or 4, 5%. And this is the kind of stuff that came out when I talked to the stakeholders. They were really, really adamant, the truck operators in particular, and the vehicle manufacturers, all of whom, have to deal with these high tariffs. Now, the regulatory cost reduction opportunities here. CNG cylinders are manufactured to a certified life of 15 to 20 years, but they're subject to periodic inspections along with the various inspections that are done for vehicles. That's not recertification. Unfortunately, currently, Brazil regulations require foreign produced CNG cylinder manufacturers to undergo complete recertification every 3 years. And it costs 300,000 reals, which is about just over $50,000. Huge expense for the cylinder manufacturers, which increase the price in competition with domestic cylinder manufacturers. But if you're only domestically supplying steel cylinders, got to have to give a break for the cylinder manufacturers. The requirement's not associated with safety, and it seems to be punitive as a revenue raiser that further drives up already expensive imported lightweight cylinders. I've had discussions within Metro about that. It's something that's going to really have to be changed within the Brazilian regulatory structure. The other things that we know are favorable, we've talked about carbon credits, not only for the OEMs, but in particular for OEMs for building vehicles, selling the vehicles, and to fleet operators who are purchasing the vehicles. It can be tied to this Proncove 8, which is for OEMs. It's like the Euro 5, Euro 6, Euro 7. And so for tons reduced using this higher emissions level, that should be credited by the government. OEMs favorable lease programs, along with purchasing natural gas vehicles, it helps to reduce the cost burden of modifying the maintenance facilities to accommodate gas vehicles and doing the self-maintenance. So we've talked to the fleet operators about saying, let's lease the vehicle. In so doing, the OEMs then become responsible for the maintenance. And they're the ones, typically with any leased vehicle, who are responsible for that. So it can help the fleet operators move slowly into the self-maintenance, but not be subject to all the first costs that are going to be needed, particularly when they start with small amounts of fleets of trucks in their fleets. For municipalities in particular, creative collaborative vehicle purchasing programs can be used to reduce the higher cost of vehicles. I've seen some of these programs both in the US. I've been involved in that very early on with utility vehicles, and I've been involved with a program sponsored by the European Commission to help purchasers of municipalities to be able to lump their purchases together as bulk purchases. Bulk purchases, instead of buying 5 or 10 vehicles in one city, you link them together with the other purchases of vehicles. And now you're talking about much larger purchases, which also is something that helps the OEMs. All of this has the potential to reduce the cost of the vehicles. Now, along with the vehicles side, obviously, we've got to balance that off with the chicken and eggs. And there's a wide variety of opportunities to suit the short, medium, and long-term needs of the fleet operators. And a lot of these are well known already, in the US and Europe. Now, in Brazil, the public stations, a lot of them are not going to be suited for heavy-duty vehicles. So the stations must be evaluated to determine what their storage and compression capacity is if they're going to be suited to heavy-duty vehicles. And we've seen in other countries, Thailand, for example, some of them in China, where the light-duty stations are opened up to heavy-duty vehicles and buses. They come along and they suck out all the fuel that's available, and then you end up having the light-duty vehicle customers standing in a line waiting for the public stations, the compressors, to provide more storage and more fuel. So there may be some stations that are suitable, but a lot are not. So we look at the central on-site stations, of course, at the fleet operators, and then the blue corridors, which you've already mentioned. And something that would be more unique to Brazil would be to create dedicated heavy-duty stations to be shared by municipal fleets that can be strategically located inside the urban core. So that alleviates the issue of each of the fleet operators to provide their own fueling initially, and ultimately they all like to have their own fueling because you can reduce the cost of the fuel if you're making bulk purchases. But in the absence of that, to have multiple fleet operator stations in certain central areas, that's something that can be looked at substantially in Brazil. And of course, you've got the traditional pipeline, the gas delivery options, pipelines, mother-daughter, even truck-mounted portable fueling stations. Some of those, the first ones developed for LNG came along with the 1996 Olympics that were sponsored for the NGV Olympics in Atlanta. These things do exist. They have standards and regulations in some countries, particularly in the United States, to some degree in Europe, but not necessarily in Brazil. So for fleet operators trying out NGVs, this is another potential. But again, the regulatory and standards have to be developed. I mentioned before hubs and ports, both air and sea. We've seen in lots of countries, airports and seaports are important, high fuel consuming hubs. Lots of vehicles come there. Lots of different public and private fleet sectors operate. So in Brazil, there are lots of opportunities in airports and seaports to develop this. Also, ISO is in the process of developing fuel connector and bunkering standards for LNG. So all these pieces are coming together and can be taken advantage of in Brazil. Now, I mentioned communications and public relations as one of the tracks of action items. And for every single sector, there's a role to play in public relations and communications. Obviously, the public sector to reach out to the stakeholders with firm policy directions and goals. The gas industry to target media campaigns to the truck and bus fleets, touting the economics and environmental benefits. The OEM and equipment suppliers have to reach out to their customers to tell them, commercial customers and municipal customers, that they have vehicles to match the driving profile of those customers. The fleet operators, once they get those vehicles into the fleets, they can tout that they're green fleets, environmentally responsible. Very important to build up their public image. The fuel infrastructure providers, to identify the target, the large fleets for the best fuel options, and identify the opportunities for shared heavy-duty fleet stations for anchor fleets that will help grow that fleet infrastructure. And of course, civil society, the people doing the analyses, to look at some of the early adopters and look at the champion pilots, fleet operators who can be touted and brought forward to show other fleet operators how successful they're being. Of course, there are others, rallies and bringing the vehicles directly to the public, advertising campaign. We've had some of the early rallies going back to 1984 and 1986, and some of you maybe remember from done by the American Gas Association, which I had the honor and challenge to run these two rallies. We've done them in Europe. The Gazprom in Russia has sponsored a series of cross-country and international rallies with blue corridors. There was even one that went from the Atlantic to the Pacific, touting the use of natural gas, 15,000 kilometers from the 5th of October to the 9th of November in 2009. So lots of things that all of the stakeholders can engage in. We've also brought to them something that was started in the United States about what I call the soft mandate, the concept to transition the fleets with reasonable milestones of purchasing percentages of their fleets, targeting the largest fleets. The concept is based upon 10 or more. The natural turnover in Brazil for heavy-duty fleet operators is about 5 years before they sell their vehicles to the second-hand market. So there's about 20% turnover every year. There's the potential of doing a soft mandate with incentives to increase the percentage. So in year one, you can talk about 10% of the purchases should be natural gas vehicles, year two, 20%, year three, 30%, and so on. So for fleets of vehicles with 100 vehicles, 20 vehicles bought per year, 10%, that's only 2 vehicles. So it shouldn't be a hardship for vehicles to bring these things on. The caveat, of course, is the program's success depends upon vehicle availability of the types that the vehicle operators use and concurrent growth of the fueling stations. And we just ran a few numbers to show the potential impact. The total vehicle population of almost 2 million heavy-duty trucks and all kinds of trucks, just if we took 25% of those, assume 25% is over 10 plus vehicles. So that's nearly 500,000 vehicles. So if we look at 10, 20, 30, 40% each year of those heavy-duty vehicles, in 5 years, you can have nearly 150,000 vehicles. Even if you assume that only 10% per year over 5 years were going to be natural gas vehicles, you're still talking about 50,000 vehicles. So this is an opportunity, again, for Brazil. And finally, some of the rules of the road that we've learned over the years. Got to lead with the environment. One of the big benefits of natural gas vehicles and the Proconve 8, which is equivalent to Euro 6, looking at biomethane not only as a fuel strategy, but as a waste management strategy to achieve the greenhouse goals on a well-to-wheel basis. Carrots and sticks, but not too much stick. We want the early adopters to get the higher incentives, and then over time, the incentive can be reduced gradually in accordance with the growth of the market share. So incentives start high early on with the low market share, and they cross over as that market share develops, because the government is always going to be concerned about the revenue impacts on them. All stakeholders have to be committed to using NGV themselves. Government, leadership by example, the equipment suppliers. You sell NGVs, you should be driving NGVs. The gas guys, don't run your vehicles on the competitor's fuel, which is petroleum. We've said that for years and years in the United States. Finally, some of that took hold also in Europe. The infrastructure suppliers, don't show up at a customer driving a petroleum vehicle when you're trying to sell them a natural gas compressor station. And then, of course, mapping out, as we said, the fuel infrastructure with hubs, spokes, and corridors. And we know that competition is going to result in lower prices with the focus on the fleet total cost of operation. Now, all of these things said, the secondhand market will develop organically if these kinds of rules of the road can be put into place. So there's lots of optimism for the heavy-duty NGV market in Brazil. Many of the elements are already in place. Fueling and vehicle equipment are there. The gas supply and the petroleum industry, the petroleum retailers are engaged. The government is cooperating with building the heavy-duty market. Light-duty NGV market in Brazil is going to help facilitate the use of heavy-duty vehicles in the public and private sector. Government support and incentives are going to help motivate the growth. And policymakers should benefit from lessons learned in other countries and regions. The involvement of managers in metropolitan regions, the states and the federal government, all of that's needed. There's vertical integration to bring this up. Strong competition from ethanol, diesel, and electric vehicles is going to be a challenge. But if the policies are transparent, that can create a balance between the various clean fuels and technologies. And of course, biomethane may be a game changer for the Brazilian vehicle sector. So the Brazilian partners have embraced the roadmap. We anticipate good growth in the natural gas vehicle heavy-duty sector for trucks and buses. And with that, I want to thank all of the stakeholders who participated in this process, the government people, particularly the US DOE and Argonne National Labs, Marcy, Elena, and Mark and their staff. It's been a really good project, and I think we're set for some really good growth in the Brazilian market. So with that, if we have questions, we're ready to entertain some of those.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. Graham Barker here. How are you doing?
Hi, Graham. Good to hear from you.
I got a million questions, but I guess number one would be if you're trying to push the Type 4 cylinders, are you going to also try to push to go to 3,600 pounds instead of sticking at 3,000? Because otherwise you have limited benefits of a more expensive tank.
That's a great question. And that is not something that we actually raised yet with the Brazilians, but probably and definitely if we had to come back and rethink some of the things, I think that would be an important element that the retail gas suppliers, the compression station suppliers, should be willing to do. And I think the gas industry, is very open to that, the gas suppliers themselves. But yes, that probably is an omission in the roadmap that we should include.
And that would also probably help defining what a heavy duty station is versus the light duty station, the pressure-based differences. The other thing I would say is all the work you've done, which is really good, everything is referenced around ISO, so there's going to be very little benefit to US companies. We're going through certification for Europe right now, CE certification, and that is extremely hard and extremely expensive. So I think there's a great market there for somebody, but if the codes aren't stretched a little bit to allow US codes in addition to ISO, I think there's very little benefit for anybody in the US.
Well, that's an interesting point. Over the years, Graham, I think as you well know, we've seen different countries getting into the NGV market who adopt other countries' standards, and it turns into a real challenge. We've seen early on countries, adopt the New Zealand standards, and they became out of date very quickly. We've seen some of them adopt the Indian standards that are always changing. Well, I don't argue with you about looking at U.S. standards. We have recommended over the years to always look at the highest level, if a country is developing their own standards, to look at the highest level international standards, and that would be ISO and the UN. Having said that, the Brazilians do have a fairly sophisticated standards and regulatory regime, and because of all the light duty vehicles they have. So I don't think that it would be difficult for them to start looking as well at the US standards, but even a lot of the US standards, the Canadian, the CSA standards, there's a lot of ISO influence. So
the big area, the big change, well, you have the two things. You have the PED from Europe, the Pressure Equipment Directive, which ASME is supposed to be equivalent or better, I don't know. But that also, to try get ASME approved in Europe is almost impossible without a PED. And the other thing is on the electrical side, the ATEX and the CE, that is where the biggest difference is. And that's the issues that European and South American manufacturers have come into the US. It's just the reverse there, because US NEMA standards. And again, there's an equivalency, but there are slightly different certification techniques. And as I say, it's very expensive. We're doing a couple of products for Europe, and the zeros just keep adding.
I know, but this has been one of the goals long term of NGV Global, and that's why we've been working at the UN, is to try to harmonize all of these different standards and regulations. Because if every country has a different regulation and you want to move internationally, as you very well know, you want to move internationally into another country, if you're stuck only with those national standards or the national regulations, then you have to do certification in every single country. So I think you've raised great points, very specific examples, and I think this is an ongoing issue for natural gas vehicles. It's going to be for electric vehicles, for all kinds of equipment, and that's where the harmonization effort has to come about. And the US has got to be part of that harmonization effort as well.
Yeah, well, when they finally get to kilometers, we'll be making a step, right?
Yeah, right. And the metric system.
Yeah.
You raised some really good points, Graham, and I would have anticipated these coming from you. Other questions and comments?
Hi, this is Julie Cairns. I have my hand up. I don't know if we're using that, but so I'm with CSA Group, and Graham, thank you for bringing up what you brought up, because I had similar comments, and I just want to extend, I am going to be reaching out to Paul and Dan Gage, but we would be interested in engaging with whomever to see what we can do, because we have not only the standards for natural gas vehicles and stations in both US and Canada, but we also have the personnel certification aspect as well. So we'd really be interested in engaging with you, Jeff, and whoever else to see about furthering what we can do to help advance this.
Yeah, I think, this is really critical, Julie, and we're all of us who've been involved in the depth of all these standards and regulations. I think it's going to be really important, and maybe we can express this with some of the Brazilian government officials, to bring in Metro, their standards group, because quite frankly, when I spoke to them, and I spoke to them in depth, they were reluctant, hesitant, skeptical about all the things different than Brazil. And while they have the Mercosur standards, and regulate, well, the standards, not regulations, I don't think. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And Julie, that's going to probably have to be done via a window into the government. And I think Elena Berger is going to be able to help very much with that, as well as the couple of people who helped out representing the Brazilian government. So the opportunity to maybe foster some workshops or even bring in some of the Brazilian officials to the CSA and put on, look at the comparison between, a matrix of here's what the Brazilian have, here's what CSA has, ISO, et cetera. That kind of work, I think, is going to be really important to levelize those requirements. That's going to continue to open up the market for safe and reliable equipment, because that's what we're all worried about. Safety,
Absolutely.
safety.
Yeah, and we also help working with the ISO activities as well, TC22 SC41 from the U.S. and the Canadian side. So and we have done this with other countries as well, as far as engaging to help them understand what we do and connecting, and then looking for a way to be able to use the work that industry is already doing. So please, connect me however we can, and I'll pull in the appropriate people from within CSA. And we are very open to being connected and engaged with this.
That would be terrific, and bring people like Graham and some of the other key stakeholders who also have international experience. I will have to have
Absolutely.
We'll have to have an addendum, so to speak, to the roadmap, and I'll talk to Marcy and Elena about what we might be able to do to facilitate something, because this is absolutely a critical element.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Good, really good points. I can't see hands going up, and I don't have control over things, so please just speak up.
Jeff, it's Marcy. You might want to introduce Gustavo. He's on the line from Abagas.
Great. Gustavo Galeazzi. Gustavo is with Abagas. Abagas is the trade association representing the Brazilian pipeline organization. And Gustavo, and in particularly one of his consultants and his supervisors, have been extraordinarily helpful in the development of the roadmap from the very beginning throughout the whole thing. Gustavo also is, one of his areas of expertise is standards and regulations. And I've talked to Gustavo a lot about the ethane issue and some of the other fuel composition issues. Gustavo, if you're available to speak to in more in depth about the standards and regulations, can you make a contribution and maybe suggest how we can continue to work together to smooth out this process, if you're available to make comment?
Hi, Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Once again, sorry about my English. I try to do my best. Okay. First of all, congratulations for your presentations. As usual, objective and 100% perfect. So we have right now some problems with standards, of course. As you showed before, we have a lot of work to do to try to bring, especially although the main development of brand new standards for HTV. So in Brazil, as you know, we have a very good standard, very good kind of standard for light vehicles. So we have 2.5 million of vehicles right now running on natural gas in a program who started that started in 1991. That was the date of the first opening station here in Brazil, and I had the opportunity to be there participating with the design of the station and other issues. So here, we talked before about the need to develop a standard for cylinders, of course, for LNG. So we do not have LNG standard for heavy duty vehicles. So, and a lot of standards that you have mentioned before. And that's a hard work that we have. And I agree with you that we should use all the resource, the standard resource available in the world, so to create a brand new market. So it's important for us to try to develop this.
Yeah, thank you, Gustavo. And I think, you know what, you can be very instrumental in assisting this collaboration. I see you as one of the key individuals linking up industry and government. So we'll go back over this and we'll talk with Marcy and Elena and bring in some of the Brazilian government people and anybody else you recommend, and Julie from CSA. Let's see what might be possible to bring together the principles and start coming up with a prescribed format and part of the roadmap to make this happen.
And Jeff, it's important to involve in Metro in all those talks, because everything that is related to safety, so have to pass to Metro hands, if I can say that. Okay, yep. So it's important to bring them to work together and create a brand new standards and regulations for the use of natural gas in heavy duty vehicles.
Completely agree. Very, very critical. Good comments. Thank you. Any other comments from the same people or other people? Graham, do you have any reaction to that?
I think you're right. I mean, standards are obviously the most important, so you really need to get them in early. Otherwise, you end up with a real mix of, you know, like you said, the New Zealand and then the NFPA and then the Canadian, and you don't know who's on first. I think another thing about for heavy duty specifically, what we've learned in the US is probably different vehicles, but when we're talking about heavy duty vehicles, you're looking at putting maybe 100 gallons on a vehicle in 10, 12 minutes, which we're doing here. We've taken some of that technology to Mexico, and we're filling some of the vehicles down there really well because they're using like old US Freightliners and Peterbilts that are in the second-hand market. But a lot of the newer vehicles, like the Chinese buses and the Chinese trucks, they can't accept the higher flows. And I think for heavy duty people, the time of fill is extremely important because time is money. You're paying the driver, so you don't only stood at a gas pump for 30 minutes. So that would be something else, I think, in your discussions with the vehicle people, that if they are designing, that they don't try save a nickel and use quarter tubing instead of 3/8 or half-inch.
Yeah. That's a very, very good point. Really a very good point. Yeah, because you can do everything you can on the fueling station side, but if the vehicle isn't structured to be able to take it, then it doesn't pass the so what test.
That's right.
So that's a really good point, Graham. Very, very good point. Other comments about any of the elements to do with the roadmap? Or questions?
What sort of line pressures are available in the pipeline infrastructure? Are they like the US, you know, down at like a 1 bar or up to 70 bar? Because we're seeing that in a number of places. It's all over the lot. So I was just curious. Obviously, for heavy duty stations, if you can access the higher pressure lines, you get more bang for your buck.
Absolutely. Gustavo, can you address that, please, about the pressure in the various parts of the Brazilian gas system?
Yeah, sorry, I have to go out, and I didn't get the
The
question.
question is, here's the question, that what are the pressures within the gas transmission system? If, you know, in the United States and a lot of parts of the world, the pressures in the pipeline system vary widely. If we can access higher pressures coming out of the gas distribution network, you can reduce the number of stages potentially of compression. So the question that Graham Barker, who's with Angie, one of the large compressor manufacturers and installers, Graham is asking, what is the range that you might find of the pressures in the Brazilian gas transmission system? And would it be possible to take advantage of higher pressures?
Okay. In Brazil, you cannot access directly the transport pipeline because, as you know, the state has the concession of natural gas pipelines. So, of course, the pressure of the transport pipeline is around, you have from 50 bars to 100 bars. But you cannot, as it is a regulatory issue. So not an issue, it is a condition. So in the natural gas pipeline, distribution pipeline, or net, you can have until 35 bars. But the normal one is around 4 bars. You have 7 bars in some of them, and in an extreme condition, 10 bars. Okay, so this is the main pressure that we have. And with this kind of pressure, you know, we have more than 1,600 stations in more than 50 municipalities in all Brazil. So, for instance, to supply one gas station, natural gas station, you have to pass through the natural gas distribution net. You cannot use directly from the pipeline for the transport pipeline.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, these are, I think, you know what, and this goes to the point that we talked about before with both Julie and Graham about pulling people together and coming up with these direct issues. And these kinds of details are going to be important elements. And, you know, we struggle with these all over the world. These are the same types of issues. So looking at how other countries have handled it and what we can do to increase that gas pressure specifically to a fueling station, if there's a possibility, that would be great. If not, we have to live with what we have and have more stages of compression with in the compressor station, which of course raises the price. So I think these are important issues. We're going to make some notes on all these things and put them on the agenda for further discussion. But thank you for that input, Gustavo. It's very good.
Jeff, well, another thing that is important to clarify here. The transport pipeline is under the control of ANP, National Petroleum Agency. That is a federal the federal how can I say federal agency. Okay.
Yeah, the gas regulatory system.
Yeah. Yes. And the natural gas companies, distribution companies, is under this the rules, the regulation of the state. So It's a regulatory state agency. So they are different entities. So with special regulation in each one. So to supply gas station, you have to use the state regulatory agency. And for transport and pipeline transport and even when you bring the gas from from offshore or inshore platform, you also under the ANP, that is the government, the federal government agency. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, which is another level of challenge in all of this process. So we have to take that into consider. This is again, Gustavo, this is not unlike what goes on in Europe. It's not unlike what goes on in the States. There's all these different levels to deal with. But hopefully, if we come through with the truth, and here's what has to be done, and target that as our goal, then maybe in time we can help deal with a better regulatory framework that's going to really help improve the delivery of gas to the customers, and then to reduce the costs. But these are really important elements. Thank you. Okay, we're coming up to closing time here for the hour and a half. Are there any other final comments or things that people would like to engage in? Dan?
Well, we thank you, Jeff, for that presentation and taking our questions. We appreciate your time and all your hard work on this. It's certainly interesting. Thanks to Mark Smith and Marcy and the whole team at DOE for putting this together. And have a great holiday season. So I know you're over the pond, but we hope things continue to stay, in our atmosphere, continue to stay healthy and have an enjoyable holiday. So thanks again, Jeff.
Yeah, and thank you very much for all your cooperation and the staff involvement. And yeah, I think this is just the beginning of future developments, and hopefully for some good signs for people coming outside of Brazil to come into Brazil, and that the system can develop together.
Yeah, thanks again.
Marcy, you still there? You have any final comments from DOE? From
Well,
Argon?
I think Mark's trying to speak,
Mark?
maybe.
Okay.
Oh no, I was just going to say, thank you, Jeff, again, and thanks to Marcy. I neglected to thank Marcy at the outset for again. I mentioned Jeff as whenever anything has to do with natural gas on the international scene, it's the call goes out to Jeff Seisler. But anything that comes up within DOE that has to do with any fuel or technology internationally, the first call is to Marcy, and so and that was that was true here. So Marcy, thanks for all your help on this. Dan, and for the folks at NGVAmerica, as always, thanks for all of your support. So thank you.
And thanks to those participating as well, and we will have more discussions following up for sure.
Right. And Dan, will you be able to post the presentation for the group or send it out? Please?
Yeah, we'll find a way to do that.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thank you for hosting.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Okay.
Happy
Thank you all.
holidays.
Thank you, everybody.
Be in
Look forward
touch.
to future. Have a great holiday.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks. So long, everybody. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.